Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Welcome to our webinar of the day. My name is Heather Grant. I am one of the community admins here at the Maintenance Community by Upkeep. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. If you are not already a member of the maintenance community on Slack, we would love to have you join us. I will add the link in the chat to sign up in just a moment. Today we have special guest Jake Neer with us, joining for a presentation on how to build a maintenance and reliability program from the ground up. I'll let Jake introduce himself, tell us a little bit more about him in just a moment, but I know that we are in for a great presentation today. The recording from our session will be available in the maintenance community on Slack tomorrow, along with a copy of the slides that you see here today, as well as at this link right after we end our session. Please feel free to share either the recording of this webinar or the invitation to Slack directly with any friends, colleagues, or anyone else you know who would benefit from hearing some of Jake's expertise. Last piece of housekeeping, you'll notice that your cameras and microphones are not turned on today. So what you want to do if you have any questions for Jake throughout the presentation is please use the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to drop those questions in. We'll take a couple of pauses throughout the presentation to address any questions that have come up and hopefully have a few minutes set aside at the end. But anything that you ask, we will be sure to get you an answer to, whether that is during our presentation or offline. That is all from me. Thank you again, Jake, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And Jake, I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Yeah, how's everyone doing today? So, hi, my name's Jake Neer. I'm going to pull my presentation up. Basically over the, I've been in touch with Upkeep over the past few weeks as I transitioned into Domino's, and there's a lot of really cool programs that's out there that Upkeep provides. And really, if you look at your maintenance program, you have to have a solid, concrete CMMS program to be successful. And I think Upkeep's a front runner in that operation, along with several others. But the program, you'll see that I'll talk a lot about CMMS and how that's successful. So as we talk, I've been through several different organizations. A little bit about me. Started in the Air Force and worked in tactical aircraft maintenance systems. I've worked in commercial and general aviation and aerospace, and I've also worked in several industrial maintenance environments. Landing me now at Domino's as the manager of corporate maintenance. And I think over my career, I've had 9 CMMS programs. I've been a master user on 3 of them. And what I've found is going through and building world-class maintenance programs is that CMMS has to be the core of your maintenance operation to be successful. So kind of how I have this broken down is into four different phases or tiers on how to roll out, depending on what the environment is, or where if you're coming into a new company and how to build that program, or if you're already there and you're ready to build, introduce lean concepts and lean manufacturing to your environment, on kind of how that should flow. So in between, I'll stop 3 different times through this presentation, allow for some questions, and allow some time for that to digest and before we move forward. So phase 1, in your phase 1 process, so really you want to look at, having tiered maintenance. So in your tiered maintenance, what I'm referring to there is having like tech level 1, tech level 2, tech level 3. And what that allows is progression and succession planning for your maintenance teams. So I can't say how many times I went into an environment where we've hired folks and never had clearly defined expectations, never really had clearly defined responsibilities, competencies, and what was expected from them. And you imagine coming in an environment where you don't have that career path, and that first week of work is chaos. Their perception is going to be, that's what the rest of my career is going to be like. So when you really build it out, the better plan you are, the better your execution is going to be. So, leveraging competency skill software like Ramsey's Corporation kind of helps you in that selection criteria, depending on what the tier of maintenance that you're trying to fill. And then also that career path. So, as some folks may start as a general maintenance at tech level 1, as they grow, they may move up to tech level 3, tech level 4, maybe move into controls, automation, maybe refrigeration, maybe into management, but it does give them that track. And then also we can go back and look at their plan and as they progressed as we backfill them roles about, they could be given additional opportunities as train the trainers or process leaders. Also, from the corporate side or the network side, is how's that leadership team look? So this applies more to supply chain or logistics, distribution, fulfillment type environment. But on that, as your team grows larger, you may start off and have two regions, an east and a west region, depending on the company grows. But next thing you know, when you have 300 distribution centers that you're trying to work with, it's really, really hard to corral and maintain those clearly defined expectations. I remember I had a maintenance director one time visit my site back when I worked for Walmart, and he had asked, and I had all these layers of different leadership, and I remember he asked one of my maintenance technicians, he says, "You know why I'm asking you that?" And he's like, no. And he's like, well, that's to make sure that whatever I'm telling him is getting to him, is getting to him, is getting to him. And so really, yeah, when you add more layers, it's easy to play the phone game and get lost in between. But having these, especially on the right-hand side, you'll have your network roles or your subject matter experts, like your CMMS PM, your automation controls engineer, your MHE managers. You could have refrigeration, you could have training manager, and then your maintenance-specific regionals on the left-hand side. And it's a really good idea to have this built because it also supports progression and succession planning for those maintenance technicians as they grow in their career. Streamlines communication. It has worked very well for me in my career. The data collection piece. So your CMMS has to be the core of your maintenance operation. If it's not world-class maintenance operation. It's very difficult to be able to capture, depending on how many assets that you have and all the different PM intervals from day to day, month to month, as well as any KPI reporting into your business intelligence or any other interfaces that your CMMS may need to do. Back in the day, we had to formulate that right on a marker board. Nowadays, we can have this all automated. It's hitting your desktop or your dashboard first thing in the morning, or however you program want to allow it. And tailor it to your business, tailor your platform, tailor your dashboard and your widgets the way that you want, or what applies most to your operation. And it depends on what hat you're wearing. So if you're a regional, you may be looking at things differently than if you're the maintenance director or a network role, or maybe the maintenance manager at the site. But really, in all those KPIs and how we look at manage our business, those KPIs are there not so much for corporate to come in and mandate or point and say how you're supposed to be running your maintenance operation. It's really for that maintenance manager. I think the more that they leverage those KPIs, the better performing their site will be. The second piece says that CMMS has to have an interface with your resource planning tools, any of your procurement, your financial programs, because we don't want to have to rekey every time we order something, every time a PO's been issued. Once it automatically interfaces, it streamlines the process, and there's less administrative work that has to be done from the maintenance manager's perspective. Something I always introduce early in a new maintenance program is this talk about total productive maintenance. Talk about world-class environment. This is just a model. I believe this is, I found something that this may be British or English or something that I used, but it pretty much hits all the pillars that you want to have to run your maintenance operation. And TPM is really good to use as your framework for your maintenance program. Some of these are obviously harder to capture than others. Shows you a foundation of total employee participation. There's a lot of material there you can kind of branch off and we could talk hours about. But I think the hardest one to obtain is usually the autonomous maintenance piece. And what I found is that's what everybody else is doing, but those that are in maintenance. So as we 5S our areas throughout our warehouses or throughout our plants, those operators that work in the areas, they know they can do a lot of maintenance related functions that we don't have to pay highly skilled technicians to perform. And usually that T3 or that maintenance T3 or process leader can help support and train and make them much more marketable and knowledgeable people about how they operate in their areas as well. We want them to be able to point out when there's actually flaws within our systems or our processes. TPM model is great to use though, but I'll introduce it early so that later on when we're ready to deploy TPM and OEE down the road, 18 months, 24 months, it's the language isn't alien to them. They understand what we're talking about and what we expect. So some different KPIs and metrics, So when you start introducing KPIs and metrics, you usually pick a few. There's usually a few of them up front, but what we don't want is to overload them with too many. So we usually go after a couple up front first, and that would be like your labor utilization, schedule compliance, PM. Be like PM compliance rates or inventory cycle counts. But usually once we perfect them, then we can layer on more and more and more. I work for an employer where I would report this weekly and monthly and then annually. And it's like, how do you get that good? Well, the thing is that when we're ready to layer more and more on, what you see is you have the momentum and the traction to run your business even better. So of them goals, you really dial down. I think that these are good ones. I say Chronos, any timekeeping system. With a timekeeping system, basically to get your labor utilization, you're going to take your direct time or indirect time out of CMMS, and you're going to divide it by whatever the time clock that was captured that they recorded for the work week. Usually, you can automate these reports, and you can set it up to where at Sunday at 12 a.m. to Saturday 11:59 p.m. It'll extract that report automatically formulated on your business intelligence dashboard, as well as long as that range mimics what Chronos is extracting for those work center work codes, and it'll formulate it and it'll reflect a widget on your dashboard. And really, you think about, well, how does that apply? Well, if you're paying a technician, work a 45-hour work week, it's kind of important that you see what you're spending your time on. It's not so much keeping track that they're being productive, but it's important when, we constantly have putting labor and parts into certain machinery or equipment that continues to break down over weeks and months and years. We can pull these reports and say, hey, as we're justifying for capital spend, we can justify and say, look, that this is obviously a lemon because I have a forklift that is 2 years old, and I have a forklift that's 10 years old, and I spend 10 times the amount of time and labor on this piece of equipment. So it also helps you justify what you're trying to do in your labor hours. Critical downtime, getting real time, and then also putting in parameters in your CMMS as well for your actions. So if we said, okay, anything that we deem critical equipment as we are inputting the problem cause remedy for those issues, also we can roll up reports and say, this is what we spent and reason why we spent the time for the downtime. But ultimately, looking at your percentages of what's allowed and formulating that on your dashboard. So those are world-class numbers and what you're trying to achieve. I call this a proof of concept. So going through these and building this out and how you want to manage your maintenance operation. This POC kind of is a starter pack, I guess. And once you have this in place, nothing's for sure. It'll go back and change. Even once you think it's perfected, you'll go back and you want to constantly improve and change your process. But we should at this point be able to answer these questions. Are our minds to what's possible? Are we open to everything? Have we explored all of our options? Constantly identifying obstacles or distractions. There may be things have we actually went out and explored. Sometimes you have to bring in this phase, you have to not just bring in maintenance, but it's a team effort. So your HR manager, your operations managers, your safety, environmental health and safety team. This is really I always apply this more to the root cause. So can we define the problem that we're trying to solve? And that's really in any RCA, if it continues to pop up, can we actually say this? Is this what we're trying to do? Have we determined that this is a problem? We talked about the KPIs. So KPIs is a big part of your business. And there's so many that we can point out, but I think getting the buy-in, culture change is a big one in a new environment. And when you overload your team with too much, there'd be too much to educate, and then basically things slip through the cracks. So pick a few and then build off of that. And then, what's our long-term roadmap? Develop a roadmap, 5-year, 10-year plan. What are we going to try to achieve? And then how are we going to track those benchmarks as we move forward? I think as we move into that phase 2, does anyone have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat so far. I think you're good to keep going.
Okay. So I call this part phase 2 as you move forward. So we have a POC in place. We're ready to load on more. Well, a lot of the time we think that we have to try to service everything in our facilities. And it's not necessarily the case. So anything regulatory, statutory, such as like HVAC, refrigeration systems, there's several others that's out there. We can outsource that, and it's all about is allowing your budget. So sometimes you have to grow your budget over time. And as you grow your budget, you look and say, okay, well, it's much easier for us to locally have this third party come in and mow our grass versus paying a groundskeeper to do it, or come in and service, clean our coils in our ammonia refrigeration system, quarterly. Maybe do it semi-annually, may just do a regular clean and then annually do a chemical clean on those coils. What that does is it cleans your hands from any reliability or responsibility, and at the same time it also frees up your technicians to perform other maintenance on critical systems. So this is just an example of those that would be included. So any life support type systems, any UPS systems, emergency power type systems would all be included. It's pretty normal to have that a national account or national service agreement put in place for those. Going back to CMMS, so all of that can be captured in CMMS. We can still manage any third-party services in CMMS. We can still manage any local maintenance in CMMS. So we put triggers in place on those intervals, and usually they're longer intervals, such as like quarterly, semi-annual, annual type periodic inspections. And so those triggers, sometimes you can prompt with a good CMMS, can prompt in advance. So maybe I get a 30-day or 2-week notice when that's coming due if the vendor hasn't reached out to me. But there's other tools if your CMS is functional and your performance is meeting standards of what you're trying to do, then you can layer more on to continuously improve. And there's a lot of different APIs out there that a good CMS has an open API where for instance, with the any PLCs within your control cabinets of your robotics or automation can, like GE has a prophecy program where it can communicate with your CMMS or your business intelligence. When I talk about from a procurement API, sorry, I got it backwards, from a procurement API, so it was Oracle, ERP, SAP, Procurify. So with your financial programs, so you don't have to rekey all of those entries. That's an open API. Sorry, I got the PLC part backwards. So on the alert management piece, what that is what we deem a critical system. So if you have what you call a critical path, something that would cost you a lot of money if your system's down. A good example for one of my previous employers, when my sorter was down, I had just over, I think 110 miles of conveyor in the building. And of that, I had 6 sorters, 2 pre-sorters and 4 main sorters, 2 north and 2 south. And we were conveying anywhere from 25,000 cases to 27,000 cases an hour of diverse freight mix. But when that system wasn't down during those day shift hours, it was costing us $12,000 on average a minute with that system being down. So I managed to be able to put alert tools in place to where a lot of the time when your system's down, it's the reaction time where you lose the most. So it's because you just don't know about it. Sometimes it's a 5 to 10 minute fix, or it takes you, 5 to 10 minutes to get to that location because the facilities are so large. But when you have an error, when you have a prompt or a alert management system like X Matters or PagerDuty alert in your phone, you could be in a meeting, you could be in the middle of a conversation, but what that does is it expedites the issue. When I piloted an alert management system for a previous employer, it reduced downtime 45% in our pilot facility. And a lot of that was just cutting out. It was the reaction time. So that's a huge gain. They're pretty cheap, and there's a lot of different criteria to select from. So you know, from leveraging CMMS capabilities, so your work stream. So this is more of a standardized work stream on the ones of how you want to break them down, but really, you know, each of these we can go in many different routes and talk about. But really, you know, from equipment classification and a 5S standpoint, you know, if we standardize our workflows and work streams, it allows us to take all the technical jargon and put it in a format that anybody can understand. So we know as maintenance folks or engineering folks that, you know, a lot of time we're trying to explain something that only that group of folks understand. Not always. I mean, I've had some good directors and general managers in the past, but majority of the time you're trying to explain a language that nobody understands. When you build it in work streams like this, it makes it pretty basic and understandable across all those different work centers. You know, from failure codes, you know, there's some standardized failure codes, but a lot of the time your OEMs will give you specifics within your PLCs of what it is, but there's pretty standard failure codes that you want to have out there. And a lot of time using these failure codes, if you can prompt them in any reactive work order, which I'll get to the 60-30-10. So anything reactive, so even a corrective repair would be considered a reactive maintenance. So that should fall in your 30% bucket. And 60-30-10 rule is not just a maintenance rule, it's used in production as well. But having that and being able to bucket there allows you to go back and say, okay, well, we had, you know, 10% of our corrective action this year was due to breakdown. You can go back in and say, okay, well, we're going to pull what was the number one problem, what was the number one cause, and what was the number one action for that specific type of piece of equipment, especially if it's a critical. And that allows and gives us data to roll up to make wiser business decisions going forward. And in that 60-30-10 rule, you know, you may start off at first and say, okay, we're going to do 40-40, but then we'll continue to set the bar higher. Time and time again, I've seen in employers, you know, where you know there's a lot of project work, especially in more of a primitive maintenance environment, where it'd be more like 70% project or administrative works going on. And at the end of the day, is when we train those technicians, a lot of the time you'll see other critical equipment falling apart or not meeting standards. And a lot of that time is because of there's no rule or goals put in place. So this is world class. This world class percentages, and that's be a good one to achieve. And you can put reports in place to extract that data out of your CMS as they log their labor hours. Going back to labor utilization, well, you look at, you know, what are they spending their time on? So it's not just, okay, I captured, you know, 40 hours of Bob's 45-hour work week in CMMS, but I can also drill down and say, what did he actually spend his time on? So of them 40 hours of the work week, I can see, you know, 60-30 and 10% of what he did. Ideally, that's what we want to have broken down into. But if we go and look and say, okay, well, we had Schneider Electric was on site for the week and they were doing some sort of annual training, his administrative and project, et cetera, that 10% may be much higher because we can speak to that. And it just allows us to speak to the business. You know, ticket definition priorities. Some companies have P1 through P5. I've seen P1s through P10s, priority levels. You know, ideally you want to have at least 3, and anything that's a high priority level, if a work order is triggered, with that alert management system, what it will do is it'll communicate through your phone, through the workflow, and call you, page you, and then start expediting what those issues are. You know, developing a training plan. So, and sometimes depending on your maintenance program, where you're at and the environment and the company, it may come sooner, it may come later. I've always found that you really can't really make those gains until you're like into the second, going into the third phase, because a lot of the time we're defining positions and jobs and competencies and pay rates and what the actual onboarding process may look like for a technician or another employee. And one of the things to do, and it's not just what we do internally or locally at the company, but one best practice to do is also to normally your OEMs or your manufacturers for all of your equipment usually come in and they do some sort of periodic type inspection. You may have them set on like an annual service agreement or a semi-annual. It's always a good idea that even when they come in and service that equipment, that you put aside some time, maybe in a third day of their visit, to have them come in and provide training for your technicians. But you want to be able to document all of that so that, maybe, you had a retirement and you hired a new technician, came in, one of those OEMs can come in and provide that training, and you can actually signed off by the OEM. And usually you might as well pay them, or you can budget them. You can budget that in or pay for it more in advance, because you're not going to pay for a separate visit to send them off for training. Everything listed here, I've been able to do that with in my career, every one of these OEMs. And so, again, I talk about the T3 or having third-party service. So T3 program's good. So T3 program, one of the things that's unique about maintenance is usually your maintenance technicians are the keepers of your facility, not just your specific area and equipment and on call for work, but they know a lot about what the pre-op checklist is going to be for a forklift or how to use this certain robotic system. And so as operations, whether shipping, receiving, or order filling teams, as they're training and onboarding new folks within operations, it's always very advantageous to bring in the maintenance technician to perform some of that training as well, because they know the theory of how that operates. And, one of the great things to do with your T3 program is to have like 30, 60, 90-day contacts with your teams, to where the maintenance manager, the T3, and the trainee sit down and talk about what the opportunities are, what they've done well, what they need to work on, so that the maintenance manager knows how to enhance their program. You do it at 60 days, kind of gives you a better idea where you're at, and then at 90 days, really that's at the point you're going to be letting them go on their own. Also, it's a good idea for the maintenance manager and the site director or general manager to partner and see how the progress is going with their training as well. We just talked about the vendor-related training. Really, you can only get so much on one slide, but annual wellness inspections is sometimes what you have. Something that's included in like the implied or extended warranties as well as service if it's a newly commissioned asset. New launch, you can usually negotiate that up front, and the more advanced upfront that you negotiate, usually the better cost savings you're going to get. And it's also, the syllabus is going to what they're going to be covering when they come, as well as planning that for budgeting reasons. So world class numbers. So if you're gonna measure your overall equipment effectiveness, your OEE in your operation, which is becoming more and more popular, and not just manufacturing, but a lot of supply chain and distribution type environments. One of the things is you want to have TPM. They come hand in hand. So TPM's purpose is to drive OEE. And so if you're going to introduce that, make sure you do them both together. And it's always a good idea to have a TPM committee or a center of excellence type team, usually including people from all areas and work centers within your facility. Anybody have any questions?
Yes.
All right.
I got a bunch of questions in during that section. I'll go ahead and read a handful. We will probably save a handful for towards the end too, but we'll go through a couple now.
All right.
One question here from Matt says, at what point in deployment does a CMMS become a tool for labor and staffing justification?
Let me repeat that question.
Sure. At what point in deployment does a CMMS become a tool for labor and staffing justification?
I think it does up front. Because you're not going to really know at first, and there's probably multiple answers, multiple paths we can take here. But I think that what they're not going to be using it right off the bat anyway. And there's going to be a huge training curve anyway. Depends on the age of the company. If it's a new company or a company that's been around a long time. The company I work at right now started in 1959. You know, the employer I worked before started 10 years ago. Very, very, so the environment's different. You kind of have an idea what it's going to take. So you're going to have a baseline of saying, hey, we need, you need so many people at first. And then as you're building out those PMs with that CMS, there's no other way you're going to be able to figure out your standard job matrix anyway without the CMMS. I mean, it's kind of tough to do on a spreadsheet. I've done that before, but you're not going to be able to constantly pull your forecasted workload either. And so over a period of time, leveraging that CMMS, I think it helps you dial in on what your staffing needs to be long term. And there's a lot of different types of, in buildings. So you may work for an employer and you have legacy buildings, new automated facilities, so it kind of really depends on the specific type of operation that you're running in that facility.
Awesome. Next question here. Where do you see APM, so GE APM, Uptake, ITUS, Lloyd's Register, etc., type solutions fit into your maintenance and reliability strategies, if at all?
Oh, that's a fancy question. I don't know if I can answer that one. How does it roll into my strategy? I guess we repeat that question again.
Yeah, sure. One more time. It's where do you see APM type solutions fitting into your maintenance and reliability strategies, if at all?
I think it's right now where I'm currently at Domino's. I think that that's a conversation that I wouldn't be ready for about another 4 years.
Interesting. Just because you need to set a foundation, or why is that?
So I've been with Domino's since March of this year, and part of that was to come in and build world-class programs. And I know that those would be steps that would be in like later on down the road, like steps 20. Now I may again like to talk about TPM and talking about it early and introducing things with no intent to even deploy it for another 2 years. I think that maybe we would have discussion around it with the continuous process improvement teams, but I wouldn't be ready for it for quite a while until I perfect steps 1 through 8.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for the candid answer. I understand the reality about maturation time for those types of technologies. One more question about APM, and then we'll resume our phase 3 conversation here. Does APM programs help in increasing reliability and availability? Can APM results and trends be used for making maintenance strategies, or are they like another PDM tool? You can read that again as well if you want.
Yes, please.
Yep. Does APM programs help in increasing reliability and availability? Can an APM result/trend be used for making maintenance strategies, or are they like another PDM tool?
I would say they're all specifically designed, so you could say the same thing for productivity tools like overall equipment effectiveness or total equipment effectiveness performance. What dictates why you select OEE versus TEEP? Why? Well, it kind of depends on the company. Sometimes they make a mistake. I think that, from a predictive maintenance tool, there's a lot of stuff that we're not going to talk about. And there's a lot of things, different methodologies that we could introduce. I think that, from a TPM standpoint, it's a good framework, but again, every company has their own lean programs. So if you're to go back to the Jack Welch Institute and ask, why did they apply their programs to their maintenance operations? Well, you look at how diverse that their operations are. They make anywhere from aircraft engines to microwaves to light bulbs or caulking or something, but they can still apply that same methodology. And so they apply that all the way down into their maintenance operation. So it really depends. It really depends on the operation. I think, if it works, pilot it. and then try to roll it out and then get feedback, and not just run with it from an engineering standpoint, but let's see what your senior leadership team thinks about it from all the different work centers.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the answers and sharing your thoughts. And well, keep going with phase 3.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
So again, this may come earlier, it may come later. It's been very advantageous to have some sort of forecasting visibility tool. It helps many different ways. It helps for, I put in here blackout dates and stuff, but it also helps for budgeting. So if you know that you're going to have a third party come in and provide you with training, and you're going to have half your maintenance team in class, or they're going to go bug an electrical cabinet or control cabinet to troubleshoot, or you have something set up. It could be a retrofit, it could be anything. What you want to spread out the wealth. You don't want to be, it's no different than doing a rebuild or something on some of your systems, because when it's harder to isolate your problem. Well, it's the same thing with spreading your people out. You start getting more problems. So having some sort of visibility tool to plan out your workload, again, better planning, better execution. If you can sit here and look in advance and say, hey, this is where these guys are. I can plan their vacations out. I know this is a blackout day, no different than going into Black Friday or Cyber Monday, making sure that people are there for work. Having this tool, you can plan around all your different events and high priority items. So that helps you long-term planning, 5-year capital planning, asset depreciation, engineering enhancements, retrofits, rebuilds, things like that, training. At this point, I call this an appearance prototype, and then here, I'll just open all these up. But usually what you have is, at this point, is you're going to want to go back and you're going to have all these issues that you never thought of. And what I have found is as we build out the lean program, like we did at Walmart. So I was in a regional building and we piloted for the regional sites, the Walmart Performance System. It's like their lean program, reliable operations program they use today. And there was all these items that came back, and we're like, we never thought about that. I found out that it went back and it pretty much changed a lot of stuff within our safety manuals, because we had to go through revisions and updates because our process changed. So that'd be something to consider. If you have a ammonia refrigeration site, or if you practice good process safety management, know that, always go back in. So if your 14 elements or your PSM, you want to, I put change management first, because that's always something that needs to initiate that process. Go through your change management or management of change checklists. And so that when you do that, what it does is it reels in all of your learning and development team, your continuous improvement, your safety, your operations, so that everybody's on the same page as you move forward and update those before you deploy them. And those are just a list of things that may have to be reevaluated. It could be new technology, new equipment. Something else that was very effective is when as you start to automate with your CMS and automate your maintenance processes, you'll find that your maintenance managers will have more time to do more, or more time to spend working and talking with their people, or more time to spend going and doing work order PM toolbox audits and things like that, walking their facility. And so, what does that look like? Well, we kind of want to standardize that, no different than a functional checklist. What does a walk look like, or what does a PM or work order audit look like? And so that's always something that'll come back as the time frees up. What else can they be doing that's going to help them optimize their building? So I have for budgets, time. So what I allow here for budgets is the reason why the earlier you get your budget in, the better. Because there's a little secret out there nobody ever tells you about, but that there's always money out there. And so even though they tell you there's no money out there, and usually the faster you get your budgets in, the faster it allows them to go through the drafting process. So usually your budgets will go through 3 drafts. And you usually have to cut, say, okay, well, they put in for $8 million, but they need to be at $5 million for the capital. And, as you go through, as the regionals are looking at it, and then your directors are looking at it, and they cut it down usually after they're finalized, and then they realize, okay, we have this much money that's left over, then they can reapply it or pull money forward. And so usually the faster you are getting it in, the faster you are, the sooner you're going to be the one having dialogue about what may be still out there and available. So always be ahead of your finances. I found that to be very successful in finding additional funds that's out there, or maybe even pull projects ahead. So at this point, your CMS should be operating at all your sites. Everybody should be on the same page. Everybody should be reporting the same numbers. And there should be accountability and controls in place. So the honeymoon's over with. I mean, if we're doing it and we're benchmarking and saying this is what it is, this is how we're going to move forward, we should be able to leverage all of these, and also they should be aligned correctly. So I have cost centers in here. So one site's, if we're coding certain assets or certain equipment to a certain cost center within our M&R budgets, that they should all be aligned as well. So even if some sites are different, there may be an exception here and there, but we need to make sure that IT teams and some of the other teams that manage that from an ERP standpoint are aligned with maintenance, and that's being coded correctly, so that we're getting more accurate analysis on what we're spending our money on. Really, I mean, I put in here for phase 4, but I'm just going to jump ahead right here and then leave it open. But basically what we got for phase 4 is that was really it. I mean, at this point, we should be operating, we should be holding folks accountable, and we should be celebrating our wins. At this point, we should be seeing an increase in our OEE and our productivity. One of the things about any site, so whenever I go and visit sites, I did this in the past in network roles or even as a maintenance manager traveling, was I always made it important not just spend time with the maintenance manager, but spend time with some of the other site leaders. And I always found it important to educate, like the general manager or the site director, on the theory of operations and how their system operates. And that they need to understand that if they ever retrofit or they ever enhance or change something a part of their system, such as speed enhancements, if it meets a certain rate, that it changes your theory of operations. So, part of that is are we playing on a fair field here? And sometimes I've seen where operations has gone back, or even had maintenance gone back and tweak systems to where they were operating and not what the specifications that we said. And then what happens is we have failure or breakdown, and then there's pushback on the warranty or pushback from the OEM on what was acceptable. So operations should be able to speak to the theory of the operation of their equipment. They should also be able to talk about TPM. If they're utilizing OEE or TEEP, they should know what TPM is at that point. And they should know what the pillars are and what it is. So they may have 7, they may have 5, they may have 4 pillars. It depends on what has, the standard operating procedure that has been put in place with the company at that point. But the long-term goal is how that methodology supports their operations. Staffing matrix. So one of the things to go back to, this focuses on maintenance specifically, but one of the things that you'll notice is to go back and you'll say, I don't know, you'll need like a plan or scheduler. So if you don't already have like a maintenance clerk or a PNS or a CMS administrator, you're going to find that it's much easier to get a plans and scheduler put in place, because what they can do is they can forecast a lot of your work for the maintenance manager. They can do parts kitting, have pre-scheduled maintenance events, usually like more quarterly or semi-annual type maintenance inspections, and have with those consumables that need to be changed out. They can pull these kits ahead. They can also schedule it with the maintenance technicians, so they know. The better scheduled, the faster the inspection repair is going to take, and then less negative impact on the operation. So having a plans and scheduler in place is I believe a very good idea. You may expand on your regional maintenance teams. So as your company continues to grow, You may reach out and you may expand to a new region. I think when I was at Walmart, I've seen them go from anywhere from 12 regions back down to 9 or 8 or something like that. So as they realigned, that kind of changes the dynamics depending on if they put these lean programs in place. So in your tiered maintenance structure, one of the things you'll see is that, yeah, we talked about tech level 1, 2, and 3, controls and refrigeration. But one good idea is that we have maintenance is normally an aging workforce with some of these companies that's been around for quite a while, and you always have to anticipate retirements, turnover. And one of the good ideas to do is for those entry level folks is hire more of like a utility or general maintenance worker to come in and shadow those folks, so that when those vacancies open up, that you have somebody in the bullpen that's ready to take over for them. And then also, from a subject matter expert, I talk about that. If you don't have those roles, which I've been in a couple of those roles actually, you're having these people can also help support training and any type of project work. So if they're not doing project management or budgeting or training, that's kind of their main goal here, because they can take a lot of relief off of your regional maintenance team. I found this to be very successful. It works. It just depends on the company on how you'd want that playbook to roll out. But yeah, I think that this would work for you. It just depends on how you want to tweak it. KPI reporting. If you don't have KPIs in place, and if you're not measuring, if you don't have a report card or a scorecard, then you're never going to improve. You have to be able to set goals, and you have to be able to move forward. That's the bottom line. It just depends on is maintenance aligned with operations on those KPIs. So, and what's the rate or what's the intervals in which you report? So if the main scorecard's an annual, you're not just going to plan and skip the test all year and then plan on them coming in and doing an annual site assessment, and then you pass them with flying colors. Usually takes a lot of practice to get there. So, reporting weekly and monthly and looking at seeing what their improvement is seems to work out very well. And that's all I have, folks. What kind of questions do you have for me?
Thanks so much, Jake. I really appreciate you running through that. There were a couple of more questions, but anything else that's still out there, please feel free to drop either in the questions tab or in the chat tab, and we have about 10 more minutes to go through. One of the questions we got is, what testing equipment does your predictive program use?
What testing equipment? So right now, what was our testing equipment? So we don't really have anything right now, but I do have a lot of RFPs that's out there to install some vibration analysis and thermal graphics, as well as some third-party providers to come in and install, for instance, like the GE Prophecy type programs.
Cool. We got a question, I think back from phase 2, it looks like.
Okay.
About that breakdown of preventive versus reactive. They said, is 80-20 not the standard for 80% prevention, 15% corrective, and 5% reactive? I think referring to that 60-30-10.
Yeah, so I think there's probably a lot of differences some people might see. It just depends on, I would do some research on 60-30-10 rule. And it depends on what works best for your company. I mean, obviously you'd probably want to have, to be honest with you, ideally you want to have 90% of your time doing predictive maintenance. But the reality is you set the goal at 60, I think, and that's an achievable goal versus what the reality is in your equipment. But it also depends on the organization. So I'm used to 60-30-10. It works for me. And I think that I've seen a lot worse. But getting there, I think when you say it creates a lot better work-life balance, I think it's a reasonable number to achieve with your team, especially if you're pushing for goals.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like the industry would depend too, like the criticality of the equipment and everything would probably affect that number as well. Next question here comes from Bob. It says, in your experience, what role does an effective RCA program play in a comprehensive maintenance and reliability strategy?
So what role is for root cause analysis? So I've worked in ag too for a brief amount of time, and they do CAPAs, but from from a root cause analysis standpoint, it depends on what your program looks like. Do you use the define, measure, and analyze and improve control to come up through RCA, or is it a 5Y or is it a 9Y? So, I came from aerospace, so I've always been overly critical because I came from an area where there was no room for error. And when we would do a root cause analysis, we did what you call the 9Y. And the reason why we do a 9Y was because if you do a 5Y, usually if you're an executive and you start asking the questions, then it goes to your regional level, then it goes to your site level, and then maybe your site leader, and then it goes to maybe your shift leader. And you find yourself after the 5Y on the bottom. I say the bottom, really top, but the person actually performed the work usually. But if you keep asking the questions, it starts climbing back up and it gets back into the manager's hands and the senior manager's hands. And then ultimately, for good feedback, it gets back to the executive's hands, which I think is the best feedback. And when you work in the highly critical area like aerospace, they want to know that because it's not okay to have airplanes falling out of the sky. So, I think from a root cause analysis, I'm being overly critical. So, I've put a lot of RCA controls in place and reported a lot of that data. So problem cause remedy kind of helps you address root cause analysis if you see a lot of trends. But I think that it just depends on what you're trying to. Is it a safety related issue? Is it a maintenance related issue? I think in maintenance, when you have the data to support it, then you can start making huge gains because then we make database decisions to leverage to change.
Awesome. Love that answer. Hopefully, Bob, you love that too. We have one more question I saw in here. It says, how would you do CMMS cleanup audit and continuous improvement?
Cleanup audit. So, well, I would lean on my customer success manager, whoever I'm paying for my CMMS, and I'd tell them to get in there and clean it up for me. No, well, it's hard because that's the thing is you want to have one master user, super user, whatever that's called. And usually your CMMS PM, it doesn't matter who it is or your admin. It needs to everything that's put in the system or changed in the system, like retiring assets and things like that, or adding new assets, needs to go through one person. Because what happens is what you don't want are duplicates. And the thing is that if you have duplicates in the system, that's a flaw in your CMMS anyway, because the CMMS should have error prompting and should say, hey, you already have that in there. Or, hey, you can't charge that part out. Hey, that should be warranty. Or, hey, you just logged 99 hours in a work order when there's only 24 hours in a day, and you meant to put 9 hours. So there should be some sort of AI there that should help from all that cleanup. But when you get out of hand, when you're talking about like from a forecasting standpoint, if your schedule compliance is showing that you're red and you're leaving all this on the table because you're not staffed, that should be something first that I think the most important part to be addressed is getting your head count to where it needs to be so you can tackle the PMs that you're putting on the table every week. So you should plan to your workload. So if your workload says on average you have 400 planned hours a work week, that's what you should have staffed to plus some, because you know that you have vacations, you're going to have call outs, you're going to have turnover and things like that. So that should allow you to be able to, a good manager should be able to plan or be able to tackle that workload. If you're leaving a lot in there and you have all these errors and typos and duplicates and things like that, then that should go back to your administrator, should be managing that. And even a maintenance manager should be able to do it too, because how can the maintenance manager manage an administrator if they don't know what they're doing? So I think that, having that admin though, or that P&S person there, will help mitigate that.
Thanks so much. I have one quick follow-up question there. Who's the best person on a maintenance team to be that like super admin or the point person for the CMMS program?
Well, that's a trick question. Because what happens is normally you have your highest tiered technician is usually pretty good. I mean, they're usually well rounded. They can usually wear multiple hats. They can usually do the CMMS part and receive parts and order parts and cut POs. They can also quarterback the team when the manager's not there. They can kind of usually do it all. And that's ideally they wind up becoming the best maintenance managers over time because they're well rounded. But it's hard to say, and it depends on the organization, because sometimes you can have somebody like that works like in operations that's in like inventory control, or they're like a clerk in another area. Sometimes it's relative to, and they can usually cross train over. So it really just depends on your organization. Don't just think about those folks in maintenance, but there might be somebody else in another work center that applies to. But the more maintenance knowledge they have, the better off they are totally for your environment, because as you're receiving parts and building out your parts room and planning and things like that, they have that maintenance experience to support it.
Awesome. Well, that's all of the questions we got. We knocked half out at that midsection and then the other half there. So thank you so much to everyone for joining and for submitting those questions. Thank you once again, Jake, for taking the time to present with us today. And I know that our audience has said lots of words of praise. So thank you so much for sharing some really valuable insights based on your amazing experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, folks. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. If you'd like to get in touch with Jake, please feel free to reach out to him on LinkedIn. That'll be the best way to get in touch with him. Mm-hmm. And then I'll see everyone next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.